As a history professor who spends a lot of time analyzing political corruption, I found that you really have to look past the sensationalism to understand how things actually work. You have to focus on the cold, hard mechanics of what institutions do when they think literally no one is watching. So in today's Explainer, we're diving into one of the most chilling case studies of unchecked power and legal evasion in American history, Project MKULTRA. Let's just start with a fundamental question, right? How does a government successfully hide a massive, totally illegal operation? Just imagine waking up in a hospital room. You're completely paralyzed. You've got wires attached to your skull. And for weeks, you are injected with massive, mind-altering doses of LSD and forced to listen to a looped audio recording for 20 hours a day. You have absolutely no idea who you are or where you are. Now, that sounds like a dystopian sci-fi novel, but it's not. This was actual psychological warfare conducted by an intelligence agency on unwitting American citizens, and it was kept completely in the dark for decades.
We're going to break down the mechanics of this political cover-up into 5 parts. First, the anatomy of a cover-up. Second, a bureaucratic paper trail. Third, the Senate demands answers. Fourth, the scope of weaponization. And finally, accountability limits.
Let's jump right into Part 1, Anatomy of a Cover-Up, specifically looking at the 1973 file destruction. So here's our chronological context. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, this top-secret behavioral research was in full swing. But the critical moment of institutional cover-up hits in 1973. It's the middle of the Watergate scandal, and government agencies are absolutely terrified of exposure. So amid this swirling panic, CIA Director Richard Helms decides to bury the agency's relentless search for mind control. He issues a direct order to incinerate the operational records of MKUltra. It's a classic textbook historical maneuver, really. You try to control the future narrative by literally erasing the past. And honestly, it almost worked. It wouldn't be until a routine check in 1977 that the truth finally came out. And what exactly was Director Helms trying to erase? Well, the files he ordered destroyed documented testing on unwitting citizens, specifically highly vulnerable populations like prisoners, mental patients, and just everyday people. We're talking extreme hypnosis, profound sensory deprivation, and undeniable chemical torture. Helms wanted these horrifying methods buried forever. He truly believed that by tossing the files into the fire, the truth was permanently turned to ashes.
But, history is rarely as neat as corrupt officials hope it will be. Which brings us to Part 2, a bureaucratic paper trail, and how evidence actually survived the incinerator.
The crucial takeaway here is this exact number, 8,000. In 1977, a CIA archivist stumbled upon a monumental discovery. Sure, the main operational files were completely gone, but 8,000 pages of financial accounts, budget slips, and receipts survived. Why? Well, simply because the agency's own bureaucracy dictated that financial records had to be stored in a completely different building. So the very bureaucratic compartmentalization designed to protect the agency is exactly what preserved the evidence of its crimes. These surviving financial records were the ultimate smoking gun. They proved unequivocally that the agency wasn't just doing theoretical or academic research. Nope. The receipts showed the direct funding of safe houses. They documented the hiring of prostitutes to lure unsuspecting targets. They tracked the procurement and injection of experimental drugs. This was a highly funded, extremely active, and completely illegal operational program happening right on American soil. This brings us to the climax of our historical study, Part 3, The Senate Demands Answers, focusing on the 1977 inquiry. Armed with this newly discovered mountain of financial evidence, the Senate orchestrated a much-needed systemic check. On August 3, 1977, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, led by Senator Daniel Inouye, convened a joint congressional hearing. This was a massive watershed moment in American political history. It was a public, authoritative demand to hold this shadowy intelligence apparatus accountable to the very democratic institutions it was theoretically built to serve. The atmosphere in that hearing room must have been absolutely electric, mainly because of who was sitting at the witness stand. Admiral Stansfield Turner, the sitting CIA director at the time. For the first time ever, an active CIA chief was forced to testify under oath and openly admit to Congress that his agency had completely bypassed American law. He had to publicly outline the true nature of these deeply illegal acts, totally stripping away the veil of absolute secrecy. And here is where we see the truly chilling human cost of this cover-up. During the hearing, Senator Ted Kennedy pressed the agency hard. He demanded a basic, essential metric of accountability. He asked, how many people were permanently damaged by these experiments? And the official response from the CIA? We don't know. Because Richard Helms had successfully burned those operational files back in '73, the agency couldn't even identify the very citizens they had tortured. It's a stunning, tragic example of how destroying data doesn't just remove liability, it totally erases basic humanity.
Let's shift over to Part 4, Scope of Weaponization, where we'll look at the corrupting of civilian institutions.
The numbers Director Turner revealed during his sworn testimony are just staggering. He outlined 149 distinct subprojects. The agency didn't just conduct this research in isolated, top-secret bunkers. They actively corrupted civilian institutions. We're talking 44 universities, 15 research foundations, and 12 hospitals that were compromised. The fundamental infrastructure of American education and healthcare was secretly weaponized by the intelligence community. They literally turned places of healing and learning into covert laboratories for psychological warfare.
And finally, we arrive at Part 5, Accountability Limits, looking at the aftermath.
So, what happens when the system catches itself committing a monumental crime? Well, the outcomes of the 1977 inquiry present this massive paradox of justice. On one side of the scale, you do see systemic reform. The hearing successfully birthed stricter oversight laws and mandated rigid informed consent rules for human experimentation. But on the other side of the scale, zero prison time for the masterminds of MKULTRA. Zero. The architects of this program simply walked away. And this just perfectly highlights the deeply entrenched limits of institutional accountability, where systemic policy changes are basically substituted for actual criminal justice.
The legacy of this inquiry is profound. First off, it terrifyingly validated what a lot of people had dismissed as unhinged conspiracy theories. Second, it proved that under the guise of national security, the government was completely willing to let the line between defense and absolute cruelty vanish. And ultimately, this hearing forever fractured the public's trust in intelligence agencies. It proved that the institutions meant to protect the public were actually capable of viewing them as mere test subjects. As we wrap up this explainer on the darkest archives of psychological warfare, we're left with a really chilling reality. Think about it. If it took an accidental oversight, the sheer luck of 8,000 pages of receipts being stored in the wrong building to expose a conspiracy of this magnitude, we really have to ask ourselves, what other secrets were in the files that actually made it into the incinerator? What else is still hidden?